Hi, it's Dr. Bob, and I am here this time in Idaho at ancient Lake Idaho. And I am here with Brent Carter and with Doug Bennett, both Pacific Northwest geologists who we've been exploring the remains of this ancient lake and the artifacts that we find here. So what kind of stuff do we find here, Doug and Brent?
Well, let me just show you a few things just to make it clear that this was a lake. It was a post-flood lake. It's a low spot, so after the floodwaters drained off, it was full of water. So we have fish teeth here. This is a jaw of a fish that had these in its neck, and it would eat snails and then crush them with these teeth. So that's a pretty neat jaw, nice jaw teeth. Here's a vertebrae, fish vertebrae. So this was a pretty good sized fish. These could be couple feet up to 3-4 feet.
This fish was probably a meter long at least.
Yeah.
There was some big fish in this lake because, well, go ahead, Doug.
Oh, that's fine. And here's a piece of petrified wood. We find a lot of wood mixed in with the fish fossils. And Brent's got another fossil that he will show you here.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. In Lake Idaho, it had a lot of volcanic vents within the lake perimeter at the time after the flood. There was a lot of volcanism taking place on the surface of the earth. And so this lake was a home to a lot of fish type, probably salamanders and all that type. But there was also a lot of hot vents, a lot of volcanic vents that were extruding silica-rich water. And it was hot. So the fish couldn't get very near these things or they'd be barbecued, cooked, and that was them. But you have these layers that are very much descriptive of a hot water deposit. As the warm waters, hot waters were flowing out of these volcanic vents, it spread out over the bottom of the lake. And the silica particles, or the silica actually melted together the materials, and it looks kind of like if you've been to Yellowstone and looked at some of the areas of the hot springs. It looks just like this. And you flop these over and you see fossils. Here was part of a jaw structure of a fish right here. And here was multiple fossils. Here's a snail, a type of Teratella right there. And here's another type of a snail, a part of a snail, part of a fish structure right here, and part of a segment of a backbone. So you can find all kinds of fossils that tell you what the type of life was in this lake at the time after the flood.
This would have been a post-flood lake that was formed with glacial runoff until the time then when there was additional activity that then, between volcanism and then additional flood deposits coming through in the post-flood floods from the overtopping of the glacial lakes that would have then buried these, and because of the silica-rich water then would have allowed them to be fossilized. Most of these don't seem to be too permineralized.
No.
They're really just basically bone, right?
Yes.
Yeah, there's not a lot of permineralization, although we are seeing iron staining. So this would have been some iron.
There's iron staining.
Yes,
in this water. So,
and one of the neat things behind us here, this cliff you see outcrop behind us, is called oolitic sandstone. And oolites are small round particles that are deposited, or concretion basically, when the sand grain is rolling up and down a beach with wave action. The calcium carbonate coats those, and then it becomes an oolite. And this is one of the largest freshwater oolites in the world, this deposit here, between 2 to 40 feet thick. And just over here is a mine where they're mining it for fertilizer. But if you look at the ground, you can see these little oolites. And it's just all over.
just little beads.
Little beads,
So at the center of each of those beads then, as the nucleation point, would have been a quartz grain,
Right, yes.
and then the calcium
carbonate around
on the
it,
outside.
right.
So it's used then, and as you said, in feed because of the calcium carbonate.
Yeah. And some of it is a little more lithified, become rock, so it's harder and it stands out, and some of it is very loose and just erodes very rapidly. And so we get these real neat, interesting hoodoo type displays of the outcrops of it.
Right, these structures.
So once again, what we see here is then the results of, we're seeing many things actually. So we see the events of the flood, which then are creating these great inland basins as the waters retreat off the continent. And then we see the results of the ice age afterwards that comes because of the waters from the flood being so heated and causing those ice deposits to accumulate at the north and south poles. And then as they melt, we then see another event with these great glacial lakes forming and overtopping and carving out these structures, or emptying out lakes, as in this case.
Yeah. So this lake actually failed near the border of Idaho, Oregon, and cut through Hell's Canyon. They think that's what caused Hell's Canyon, the erosion of it, and then out the Columbia to the ocean.
Okay, so we're seeing once again that the evidence points to the events that are described in the Bible, with the Bible being an accurate historical record and describing not just the lives of the people, but the events that are happening in the world around them, and the fact that God created this wonderful world for us, and then because of the sin of man, it was destroyed. But that men were saved. Those who chose to follow him were saved in the ark, and then the population that lived afterwards experienced all these great traumatic events of these lakes forming and then draining off and continuing to carve the features that we see in the world today, these catastrophic features. But it's one more example then for all of us that it's okay to believe, and that as we look at the evidence in the world around us, we see that everything testifies of Christ. So again, it's Dr. Bob. I'm here at ancient Lake Idaho in the Idaho desert.